While we've seen many different iterations of Spider-Man over the years, the one consistency was that they were all at least superhero movies. However, there was a point way back in the 1980s that Spider-Man nearly debuted on the big screen in the weirdest way possible, in a body horror film that would have been directed by Tobe Hooper. So what if it happened? What if Canon Films decided that they didn't want to wait any longer to get a Spider-Man movie made, and they went with this insane idea? Simply put, what if Tobe Hooper's Spider-Man was made? In 1985, after a failed attempt to make a Spider-Man movie by Orion Pictures, which would have been directed by future Fantastic Four director Roger Corman and written by Stan Lee himself, Orion actually let the rights to Spider-Man slip through their fingers, and it was bought out by Canon Films for a mere $250,000, which is pretty insane considering that Spider-Man's now a multi-billion-dollar property. Canon were infamous in Hollywood for their cheap movies, and they become somewhat of a laughingstock later on due to the well-documented failures of Masters of the Universe and Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. But at this point, they weren't quite there yet, and they still had the clout to buy out Spider-Man, with the deal they signed allowing them until 1990 to get a Spider-Man film off the ground before the rights expired. However, it should also be noted as well that Golan and Globus, the men in charge of Canon, only heard about Spider-Man and his popularity with children, and supposedly had never even so much as seen a picture of Spider-Man before. Oh boy, this sounds like a match made in heaven, doesn't it? They were clearly hoping to show the world that they could make more serious movies, and so they made the very strange decision to hire Tobe Hooper, director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to helm Spider-Man the movie, with Outer Limits' Leslie Stevens to write the script. In this version, Peter Parker would have been an ID photographer at a pharmaceutical company, and he would have been forcibly tested on with radiation by a man named Dr. Zork, which would turn him not into Spider-Man, oh no, because that would be too easy, but instead a giant humanoid spider monster that transforms back into human form during the day, not unlike a werewolf. Or spider, I guess? I don't know. Either way, it would turn out that Zork has amassed a large collection of monsters, and he wants the man spider to join his army, and of course he refuses. Also, it's worth mentioning that Peter would be absolutely horrified by his appearance and be incredibly suicidal, actually. So I imagine the story would have then become about getting over these fears of his new appearance and powers, and becoming a reluctant hero to take down Dr. Zork and his army of monsters. However, thankfully for everyone involved except Tobe Hooper, I guess, Stan Lee reportedly hated this idea and shot it down very, very quickly, thank God. So that was Tobe Hooper's Spider-Man, and oh boy do I have things to say about it. Okay, so would it have been a good movie? Surprisingly, you'll probably be shocked to hear this, but yeah, it could have been, because Tobe Hooper, he was good at this stuff, and I don't think this movie itself would have been bad, but for an adaptation of Spider-Man, oh boy, this would have been very off the mark indeed. This would have possibly been one of the worst superhero movie adaptations ever, because like even bad superhero movie adaptations get the genre right, and this doesn't even do that. Like, come on, Spider-Man is not a body horror. I think we can all agree it's very far from that. I don't even understand why Golan and Globus thought this was the way to go, because apparently they knew Spider-Man was a kid's character, and yet they still envisioned this. It's like, even though they didn't know a thing about Spider-Man, you still think they should have known better than this. But it sounds like it could have been a good movie if it wasn't associated with Spider-Man. I don't even hate the idea of the movie. I like the idea of a monster spider guy, who has to take down an army of monsters. I don't even mind that. That sounds kind of like a cool idea. But it's based on the Spider-Man comic character. If it was its own thing, like the Arachnid Man or something different, the human Arachnid, then maybe it would have been good. Like, it could have been its own, fun, body horror B movie. Maybe it could have been the next, The Fly. But as a Spider-Man adaptation, this is very, very wrong. The people involved were just not right. I mean, not one of them knew anything about Spider-Man. Tobe Hooper didn't know about Spider-Man. Golan and Globus didn't know about Spider-Man. They just heard Spider-Man and thought, body horror, you know? And as I said, I don't even think it would be a bad movie necessarily, although it could have been, because as I said, Canon films were very, you know, cheap, and I don't even think the special effects would have looked that good. So I don't even know if it would have been a good movie, whether it was associated with Spider-Man or not. But as far as an adaptation of Spider-Man goes, I am incredibly, incredibly grateful this did not get made. I think we can all agree this would have been a horrible first impression for Spider-Man on the big screen. And I mean, yeah, there are scary characters in Spider-Man. I'm not saying it's all sugar and rainbows, but like, you know, this is too far. Like this is a bad idea. This is just a really, really bad idea. And they actually did a storyline in the comics where Peter transforms into a giant spider and gives birth to himself. That was a stupid storyline. And this reminds me of that. If it didn't work in the comics, it's not going to work here. And yeah, as I said, it could have been good on its own. Tobe Hooper was a fantastic director. He really understood how to make a good horror movie. And, you know, if Canon provided him with the right budget, I think it could have been a good movie on its own. But for Spider-Man, Stan Lee had every reason to hate this. I think every Spider-Man fan in the world would have loathed this movie. I think we can agree it is ultimately for the best that this movie did not get made. Thank goodness for that. Either way, let me know in the comments down below. Do you think this movie would have been good? I imagine not too many of you will think that. But if you think this movie would have been good, separate from Spider-Man, which I would agree with, then let me know in the comments down below. Also, give me more what-if recommendations about Spider-Man or whatever else you can think of. Give this video a thumbs up and share with all of your friends on all your various social media platforms. And I'll see all of you in the next video.